Hello, Bristol residents. My name is Julia Loria Blum. I'm with the Cradle of Aviation, where I am the Curatorial Assistant and Research Assistant. It's nice to be here today to speak to you about the theme of the month, Long Island, the Cradle of Aviation, which is located in Garden City, and where this telecast is being filmed from is the Cradle of Aviation. From the Hempstead Plains and beyond. Since the beginning of recorded history, humans have pursued the dream of flight. Over the course of decades, these pioneers, many of them Long Islanders, solved basic problems of an aircraft's shape, source of propulsion, and means of control. On December 17, 1903, the first controlled, powered flight of aircraft took place at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, with the Wright brothers. The average speed through the air was 31 miles for 57 seconds. While North Carolina may be the first in flight, Long Island is where it was nurtured and it grew up, and therefore is known as the Cradle of Aviation. The central area of Nassau County was known as the Hempstead Plains. It was the only natural prairie east of the Allegheny Mountains, and this proved to be an ideal flying field, which was treeless and flat, with only tall grasses and scattered farmhouses. The Hempstead Plains were the scene of intense aviation activity for over 50 years. During this time of maturity, Long Island was the home to some 70 airfields, from westernmost Kings and Queens County through Nassau and to the East End. But the majority of early activity and innovation was centered on the Hempstead Plains, with most early activity taking place in Mineola, Garden City, and Westbury, as well as Belmont Park. Hazelhurst Field was called eventually Roosevelt Field, but from 1917 to 1921 it was Hazelhurst Field, which was again on the Hempstead Plains. In 1921 to 1929 it was known as Curtis Field, not to be confused with Curtis Field in Valley Stream, and then eventually better known as Roosevelt Field from 1929 to 1951. This picture is of Otto Lilienthal's hang glider, which is at the Cradle of Aviation. By 1896, the first recorded flight of aircraft took place on Long Island when a Lilienthal-type glider was flown from the bluffs of Nassau County on the North Shore. By 1902, gasoline-powered airships were flown over Brooklyn. Powered flight had come to Long Island to stay. And I just want to emphasize, Brooklyn and Queens is part of that equation. We think of it more as the city. Geographically, it is Long Island, so the archives at the Cradle include Brooklyn and Queens. The Hempstead Plains were a natural airfield, as I said before. The island was ideally placed at the eastern edge of the United States and at the western edge of the Atlantic Ocean and adjacent to America's most populous city. It was made for an ideal focal point for most transatlantic and transcontinental flights. By 1909, the first daring flight was made from the Hempstead Plains, and because of its ideal landscape, Glenn Curtiss brought his biplane, the Golden Flyer, here and won the Scientific American Prize of $10,000 for the first sustained flight in the air with the Golden Flyer on Long Island. He went 25 kilometers, which is approximately 16 miles. By 1910, there were about 3 airfields operating on the Hempstead Plains, and Long Islanders were building their own airplanes. At that time, dozens of flying schools and manufacturers would spring up, making Long Island the center of the aviation world. The New York Aeronautical Society was headquartered at McLaughlin's Hotel on the northeast corner of Old Country Road and Willis Avenue, and it was later named the Gold Bug Hotel after the Golden Flyer, which the aircraft was also known as the Gold Bug. Albert Moissant opened the Moissant School of Aviation on the east side of the road from Mineola to Fairgrounds at Garden City. As you can see, it was a very colorful time in history, and it was very entertaining. These new flying machines brought out many, many people to view them and see them testing and racing. And of course, there were a lot of tragic fatalities in the course of tweaking it to where it is today. The landmark event that occurred on Long Island was in 1910. One of the landmark items was at Belmont Park at the International Aviation Tournament. It was a very novel thing at the time, and you had barnstormers flying through and taking people up for rides for a price, and that stimulated a lot of people to learn how to fly. This is the race between a monoplane and a biplane at Belmont. Some of the earlier pioneers of aviation were Thomas Baldwin, Clifford Harmon, Lawrence Sperry. And in 1911 at Nassau Boulevard, Earl Ovington delivered the first airmail out of Mineola. Cal Rogers flew on September 17, 1911, from Sheepshead Bay to Pasadena, California on November 11th. And the name of the aircraft was the Vin Fizz because it was sponsored by the soft drink company Vin Fizz. And if I may, I would like to alter a popular saying, behind every great man is a woman, with beside every great man is a great woman. And Harriet Quimby was one of them, the first American licensed female pilot. She was known for her purple silk flying suit. And in 1912, she flew the Blériot 11 from England to France across the English Channel and left a major impact on the role of women in aviation. We now move into World War I. This is an aerial of Hazelhurst Field, later known as Roosevelt Field. During the World War I, there was a cadet training center, and this is what it looked like, with the cadets standing at attention. It's hard to imagine Long Island being this open and vast when you see all the development, but this is what it looked like. This is a picture of Mitchell Field, which the hangars obviously have changed over to the checkerboard roofed ones, which still stand at Mitchell Field. 1L in Mitchell Field. Here are some cadets on the training ground pushing a biplane out of a hangar. This is a photo of the Curtiss Aero and Motor Corporation, which opened Washington Avenue in Garden City. And women were utilized quite a bit. Here they are doping the wings of an aircraft. You could say they were the early Rosies. It's a very striking picture. We now are going to enter the golden age of flight. And this is the time between World War I and World War II. In early 1919, the first flight across the Atlantic was made when a Navy Curtiss flying boat, the NC-4, which was built in Garden City, flew from Long Island to England. This is a Curtiss mail-carrying Jenny, which was one of the most popular World War I airplanes, later used by the Postal Service for airmail service on the roads between the route between Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and New York in 1918. In 1919, the R-34 dirigible completed the round-trip crossing of the Atlantic from England to Long Island. Of course, on the morning of May 20th, 1927, after a long sleepless night in the Garden City Hotel, Charles A. Lindbergh took off in the spirit of St. Louis from Roosevelt Field in less than 34 hours after departure and arrived in France, becoming the first person to fly solo across the Atlantic. This is Charles Lindbergh with his mother in front of the Spirit of St. Louis. And this is right before departure. More pioneers of the golden age of aviation, of which there were many. One of the biggest strides in aviation occurred here on Long Island, in addition to all I've spoken about previously, and that is of James Doolittle, which was his momentous flight, which took place in 1929 when he made the very first blind flight at Mitchell Field, utilizing instruments only, manufactured by the Sperry Gyroscope Corporation. Many more would follow. This is Bert Acosta in front of a racer at front of the production plant, Curtis, in Garden City. A very colorful character, Roscoe Turner, with his lion cub, Gilmore, who were his sponsors, the oil company. The infamous Wiley Post with the Winnie Mae. Al Williams with the Grumman Gulf Hawk. Fiorello LaGuardia was a World War I aviator, and here he is at Floyd Bennett Field with Howard Hughes. Eleanor Smith, known as the Flapper of Freeport. She was the youngest licensed pilot in the world at the age of 16. She was a gutsy woman who flew the Waco 10 under all 4 New York City East River bridges on a dare, and later broke speed and endurance and altitude records, to name a few. I'll be talking about her later. This is Jackie Cochran, who took a 3-week vacation to learn to fly at Roosevelt Field, later becoming the first woman to break the sound barrier with Chuck Yeager as her wingman. Women were involved in the cause of aviation from the very beginning, from Catherine Wright's support of her brothers, through the Golden Age and to the present. A group of international pilots known as the 99s began here at Valley Stream, at Curtis Field in Valley Stream. And Amelia Earhart came up with that name for the amount of chartered members that were women pilots, the 99s, which are still in existence today. Here's Amelia at Roosevelt Field. This is the family known as the Flying Hutchinsons. In the promotion of aviation, they flew transcontinental and made stops along the way. They wanted people to become more comfortable with flying, and it worked. Betty Euler Gillies from Syosset was another early aviator and one of the original 99 members. This is an aerial of the Aviation Country Club in Hicksville. And here are some civilian flyers. Another great feat were the flying boats of the 1930s, such as the Boeing 314, which flew out of Port Washington, the Pan Am Clippers. The Savoia Marchetti, the S-56 flying boat, was manufactured here on Long Island. The Peel glider in College Point, Long Island. Here's a picture of the Pan American Airways Boeing Clippers at Port Washington. And commercial aviation in the Golden Age grew from a very tenuous situation where women were used a lot in photographs at this time because they wanted to promote it and make people feel comfortable. They felt that the way of thinking was if a woman could do it and feel safe, then anybody can. Very, very luxurious as compared to today. And expensive. We are at the eve of World War II. This is an overhead shot of the present Mitchell Field. Obviously, it's more developed now, and Hofstra is there on the right side, on the left side somewhere, what became Hofstra and Nassau Community College. This is the first observation squadron stationed at Mitchell Field in the air, protecting our shores over Long Island. This is Mitchell Field's headquarters, which is now Nassau Community College. And this is a formation of B-18s over New York City. And this is the infamous Leroy Grumman, one of the great innovators of aviation on Long Island and worldwide. Also, Alexander D. Seversky, who began Seversky Aircraft Company, later to become Republic. This is a Grumman F-3F, which was the last Navy biplane built by Grumman prior to World War II. And then we move into World War II with combat aircraft built here on Long Island. This is an aerial of Grumman in Bethpage, July 1941. Some of the famous aircraft that flew, formidable fighters, were the Grumman F-4F Wildcat, the Avenger, TBF. Brewster produced aircraft such as the Brewster Buffalo out of Long Island City. And here is the P-47 production line at Republic Aviation, formerly Seversky, in which by the end of the war, between the facility here on Long Island, primarily they built 15,000 P-47 Thunderbolts. This is a 3-ship formation of the P-47, which was the last version of the Thunderbolt. At work during World War II. World War II created opportunities for women, previously unparalleled. Here is a color picture of the inside of the production plant, men and women working together. This is, I believe, at Grumman. Morale posters. Rosie the Riveter. Rosie's at Grumman, working on a wing. Listen, gals, the boys want you to make up pretty, but they want you to make up quotas, too. And they did. In unity, there is strength. These are P-47s on the flight line at Republic in 1944. This is Albert Marshev at Republic podium at the celebration of the christening of the 10 Grand. The 10 Grand was the 10,000th P-47 produced, and on the 10 Grand, when they rolled it out of the hangars, you had the women Air Force service pilots there who present for the ceremony. And this is Teresa James, who was the very first pilot to fly the 10 Grand off the production line and ferry it to Newark, New Jersey for shipment overseas. In the second half of 1944, every single P-47 Thunderbolt produced was flown by a woman in the cockpit on its first leg of its journey to war. They did not fly combat. They did not fly overseas. They strictly did what Jacqueline Cochran, the director of the WASP, called dishwashing jobs, to relieve men for combat duty overseas. This is Nancy Love, who also flew on Long Island, and Betty Gillies from Syosset, the first 2 women to fly the B-17 during World War II. Nancy Love was the director of the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Service Squadron, later to become linked with Jackie Cochran's group known as the Women Air Force Service Pilots, or WASP. We now are post-World War II, and we are entering the jet age. Here we see New York City's airport in Flushing, and the land, such as this, which was in close proximity to New York, was where established airfields once stood, and they evolved into larger airfields for commercial flight. And the initiative to develop commercial flights began with an outburst, actually, by New York City Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia, who, upon his arrival of a TWA flight at Newark Airport, which was the only airport serving New York, his ticket said New York, and so he demanded to be taken to New York, and he ordered the plane to be flown to Floyd Bennett Field in Brooklyn, which had proven to be commercially unsuccessful. And because of that, and its difficult logistics, it was not a feasible location for an airport. So Mayor LaGuardia urged New Yorkers to support a new airport within their city, And on October 15th of 1939, New York City Municipal Airport was dedicated, with its name being changed to LaGuardia Field in 1947, when the Port Authority gained control of it. This is a Pan Am Boeing 314 flying boat, which moved its operations from Port Washington to LaGuardia in 1940. And as commercial flying takes off, observation decks become a very popular place to go to be entertained with the public's fascination with air travel. So thousands actually would travel to the airport and pay the dime fee and watch airliners take off and land from within their fences. As LaGuardia became overcrowded with flight activity shortly after, the mayor wanted to open a new, improved facility to relieve traffic at LaGuardia, and he developed a new international airport. Construction began on a tide march at the Idlewild Golf Course in Jamaica in 1943. It was originally named Major General Alexander Anderson Airport, and it was changed by the New York City Council to New York International, but it was commonly known as Idlewild until 1963, after the assassination of JFK. Great feats of architecture, such as the Pan Am Terminal, stood at JFK, and of course Euro Saarinen TWA Terminal, which is now a landmark. Long Island manufacturing, and here are a few of the military aircraft produced on Long Island after World War II. This is an overhead of Republic, which is the third busiest airport, commuter airport in New York State to this day. This is an interior of Republic Aviation, F-84 productions. These aircraft were used primarily in the Korean War, and the F-84F and the F-105 Thunder Chief in Vietnam. This is an aerial of Grumman at Calverton. And here is an interior shot of F-14s being produced at Grumman. The Grumman A-6 Intruder was in service from 63 to 97, and the F-14 Tomcat 1974 to 2006. Now we enter the Apollo program between 1963 and 1972. In John F. Kennedy's speech, which soared at Rice University in 1962, the intent of his address was meant to stimulate the American people to support the effort of NASA to send a manned spaceflight to the moon. And the president said, I quote, "But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why 35 years ago fly the Atlantic? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard, because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept and one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win." NASA, of course, awarded the contract for constructing the lunar module, the LEM, to the Grumman Aerospace Company in Bethpage, New York, to land a man on the moon. Altogether, 14 would be assembled, and the lunar module was used on the Apollo missions. Here are some pictures of the clean room at Grumman, the construction of the LEM. Engineers and technicians observe a simulated moon landing, the ascent and descent stages coming together, and a group photo, which exudes the great pride that Grummanites felt and continue to feel to this day, as they were instrumental in meeting the formidable challenge that was set up by JFK only short 7 years prior. Apollo 8 becoming the first aircraft to enter orbit in 1968, and Apollo 11. On July 20th, 1969, the first man set down the LEM on the moon. The Eagle had landed. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. In all, 6 missions landed on the moon, Apollo 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17, and the LEM enabled their safe return back to Earth, including the aborted Apollo 13 mission. As we move past the Apollo program, this is a photograph of an interior of Grumman, where the Space Shuttle wing was constructed. And this is Fairchild Republic in Farmingdale, where the Thunder A-10 was contracted for the U.S. Air Force. In concluding this presentation, I give you this image of a severely combat-damaged Fairchild Republic A-10 Warthog. For me, it brings to mind pioneering aviatrix Eleanor Smith, the flapper of Freeport, who was the first woman test pilot for both Fairchild and Belanca. So, in recognition of Women's History Month, I chose this image of the pilot who flew it over Iraq in 2003 and who brought the airplane safely back to ground against extreme, difficult odds because of the aircraft's amazing construction and integrity. Her name is Captain Kim Campbell, and she was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for this action in aerial combat. As Long Islanders, we can look at the image and appreciate it as a symbol of the pride and integrity of Long Island's aerospace community, a product that continues to serve valiantly in the U.S. Air Force to this day, the A-10. It is from a long line of aircraft manufactured on Long Island that took a licking and kept on ticking. It's a testament to all the pioneers of aviation, the men and the women, who once flew in the fair and not so fair skies above us over the course of little more than 100 years. More importantly, it's a testament of the people who challenged the air in the forefront and who pushed the envelope, lived and died and flew these incredible machines, as well as those who worked toward the progression of aviation quietly in the background, some who I'm sure are in this audience. And my hat is off to you. I tip my hat. In reflecting upon their contributions and their legacy, it cannot be understated. Long Island and the contribution of Long Islanders toward the cause of aviation over the decades is a vast and collective legacy. Here, aviation evolved after the first flight, from the cradle to the moon, and back and beyond, and we have come full circle. Thank you for listening. Now I would like to ask if there's any questions that I'm able to answer. Massapequa, do you have any questions?
Yes, we have one question.
Okay.
About the Roosevelt Field that you were speaking of, is that the same Roosevelt Field shopping center that we have today?
Yes. Roosevelt Field Shopping Center was actually in two parts, two fields. Charles Lindbergh actually took off from what would have been Fortunoff, which was Roosevelt Field as well. As I said, it began as Hazelhurst, then it was Curtis, and then it became Roosevelt. And yes, that is the site, which you would never know today, of where all these great flights took off. North Woodmere, do you have any questions?
Yes, we have two.
Okay.
First one is, was Amelia Earhart ever found?
No, she was not.
Well, okay, and the second one is,
In Port Washington, besides an operations center, were there any landing facilities?
In Port Washington, it was strictly marine, as far as I know.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome. White Plains, do you have any questions?
No, but we have a comment. This was a very good session, and we enjoyed it. It was very informational. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Woodcliff Lake, do you have any questions?
Yes, we have one question.
Okay.
Oh, first of all, you made a beautiful presentation.
Thank you.
And second, is there a fee?
Yes, there is a fee. Off the top of my head, I don't know. There's senior discounts and veterans discounts. But I couldn't quote you exactly. If the administrator there wants to go on www.cradleofaviation.org, it would be under general information, all that. Please come and visit us. Thank you very much. I was happy to do this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and have a good day.